Hello, I'm Mike Myers, Kilo 3 Delta Oscar, and one of the most common questions I get, particularly recently, is how do you program a DMR radio? DMR is becoming more and more popular all the time, and it's confusing to some people, and I think a lot of it's a terminology difference. So there are some different concepts there as well, and in this video I want to walk through the history of DMR, the terminology of DMR, and programming your DMR radio. We're going to be programming this 878 in this video, but the programming is the same, basically the same for all radios. There's different features. Some radios have different features than others, but in the general sense, there is a common way to program things. So, sorry for being rude and having the earpiece in. We are preparing to move, so we are packing up everything, and my studio equipment and lab has been packed. So I'm not being rude by putting something in my ear. I just can't find the microphone that I normally use to record. So anyways, let's get started. We're going to go look through some DMR terminology and history and get right in the programming the radio. All right, before we jump into walking through how to program your DMR radio, I want to talk through some of the DMR terminology. I think a lot of this is where some of the confusion comes in, because there are some very similar things to what you're probably used to in amateur radio, but the terminology just is different, and I think it's confusing. So we're going to walk through this before we get started programming, and then a little bit about the history of DMR and why things are the way they are. So let's first start out with color codes. So the easiest thing to look as a color code for DMR is the same thing as a PL tone for an analog repeater. So you can assign one of 16 different color codes to a DMR repeater. For amateur radio, they typically are almost all 0, so color code 0. But in the commercial world, they use a lot of different ones because you could have overlapping repeaters with frequencies and things like that. So they'll make a different adjustments to the commercial ones so they can overlap an area with great coverage. But for the simplicity of it, just think of a color code as a PL tone. Same thing as a PL tone. The other thing, next one is a time slot. So DMR divides the time for the transmission into two different slots of digital transmission. So in the same bandwidth, you can have an FM conversation. You can have two different conversations going on at the same time with a digital mode for DMR. And it uses a technology called time division multiple access, or also known as TDMA. This allows, like I said, two conversations to happen at the same time, and it could be both a transmit and a receive. So the repeater understands how to deal with that as far as when it's in transmission or receive mode. So it works very nicely. It's very similar to CDMA, which is used by cell phones, which that's a little bit different technology, but does the same type of thing, where it allows, in this case for DMR, on a 12.5 kilohertz bandwidth, allows for two conversations at one time. Okay, the next one is talk group. The simplest comparison to talk group in DMR are the similar things of reflectors in D-Star and rooms in Wires X. Each DMR network's talk groups work a little bit differently in the back end, but they do work similar to the end user, so you don't want to know the difference and how you program it. But that's the simplest comparison. There are differences, and we're going to walk through those differences. For example, you can have multiple talk groups on a time slot at the same time. Only one can transmit at a time, but you could have multiple ones in listen mode, where with D-Star and Wires X, you're only on that one reflector or that one room. Okay, the next item is a zone. A zone is a grouping of channels, and in comparison, if you're used to using a Yaesu or an ICOM radio, they have groups where you can assign a channel to a group. Like you can have maybe 15 or 16 of your favorite channels in a group, and you can scan through them and things like that. It's the same thing, it's called a zone. It's used a little bit differently, particularly in the commercial world, which is where DMR comes from, because you can have, say you have a local repeater that has a bunch of talk groups on that you like to listen to. It'd be one repeater, but because each talk group's configured as a channel, you put those channels into that talk group. So the most common way to use a zone is to make a zone per repeater. And then I also use a zone, like I have all my analogs in one zone and all my simplex in another zone. So I can just jump to that zone and scan my local repeaters for FM, or I can also do the same thing with simplex. So just think of a zone as a group of channels. That's all. It's the easiest way to remember what that is. All right, let's jump down here to the next one. So a scan list, and as the name suggests, it is a list of channels that you want to scan in the list. And as I mentioned before, the way a lot of radios work is you put your channels into groups, and then you can scan the group. In this case, with DMR, a scan list is a list of channels that you want to scan, and you can assign a different scan list to every channel. So you could be switching through your channels, and based upon where you went, say you went to a simplex channel, for example, when you hit scan, it would scan the simplex list, not the whole list for that zone. So it's very flexible. Sometimes with flexibility, confusion comes in, and we'll walk through how that works. Then there's promiscuous mode. So the thing about DMR is you're only going to hear the talk group that you have on your channel. So you could be scanning channels and listening for different talk groups, but say you're on the Maryland talk group. And when you're there, you see your radios receiving stuff, but you're not hearing anything. You don't know how to figure out where they're at. So there's a promiscuous mode that allows you to listen to anything that comes in on the DMR repeater, no matter what talk group it's in. So that's what we call promiscuous mode. It's very easy and it's convenient to find out, like, hey, I'm listening to Maryland, but somebody's talking on here a lot. What group are they talking on? I'd like to maybe get into that. You can go in promiscuous mode and listen, see where everybody's at, and then you can switch over to it. And then there's another one, next one thing on the channel. We'll walk through all this in the channel configuration, by the way. It's called a received group list. And this is probably one of the most confused things I've seen in DMR programming. It's a list of talk groups that you can hear on a channel. But the thing is, you can only talk on the channel that it's programmed for. So let's say you're on Maryland and you've created this received group list that includes like 3 or 4 or even more possibly talk groups. So you're going to hear, say you program Pennsylvania and Delaware on there, and you hear people talking on Pennsylvania and Delaware that are on those talk groups. But if you're on Maryland, when you key down to talk back, you're only going to talk back in Maryland. I actually am going to walk through here, and I'm not going to use this because I think it confuses people as to what they're hearing and why they can't get back. This is probably one of the most confused things I've seen people use. If you look at it from the commercial world, let's take a bus, for example, a school bus network, a radio network. So you may have different bus talk groups, but you may have like an announcement talk group or an emergency talk group. So if somebody's talking on that, you want to be able to hear what's coming across, but you want to be able to answer back to the dispatcher on your talk group. So that's kind of how it's used in the commercial world. In the ham radio world, I don't see much of a use for it. I mean, there may be some unique things out there, and obviously you can program these things. They're very flexible, so you can probably find a use for it. But in my experience, people get confused by this because they try to talk back to something they're hearing and they're talking back to the wrong place. So I don't program these in to be used just for that reason. Another one you might hear is roaming. So this doesn't apply as much into amateur radio unless you're in an area like where I live currently in Maryland. We have a group of DMR repeaters, and they're all programmed very, very similarly. There's just minor differences. So I can roam from one repeater to the other because they're configured exactly the same, or very similar enough that the most common ones are there. Maybe a one-off here and there. But what this allows you to do is the radio can listen to the strongest repeater. As you move around and you're driving around your vehicle, it can switch to the other repeater using roaming. But that does require you to have your zone set up properly. So that's the big thing with that. So but if you live in an area that's like that and you're lucky enough to have that, then that's a neat feature. If you, especially driving back and forth to work, you can move around. But I don't see it used very often in amateur radio. That is definitely a commercial thing where you're covering a large area with a commercial trunking system or something, and it can use that. All right, so that's the DMR the terminology, and hopefully we cleared up some confusion there. I do want to talk a little bit about the history of DMR because there's some reasons things are the way they are. First of all, DMR wasn't designed for amateur radio. It was designed for commercial use. It's been adopted to amateur radio, and it works well in amateur radio with a few tweaks and things like that. And there's been changes to the DMR radios that are making it much easier for amateur radio as well. So only recently, I'm going to say the last couple of years, has a dual band DMR radio become the normal. So, and actually it's not even normal for lots of commercial. It's still very much either UHF or VHF. When I first got into DMR, they didn't have a dual band radio at all. And I eventually, in the last couple of years, have gotten a couple of handhelds, and now like the 878s and the 578s and everything, they're all dual band. Most radios are coming out with dual band. TYT has dual band now as well. So I mean, it's definitely changed in the last 5 years. Also, DMR radios are traditionally not front panel programmable because they don't want the person who's using them to be able to make changes to them. So if you have a radio like an 878, which we're going to program today, or a 578, the fact that you can change things on the front panel is something new, relatively new. And the more, like I know the TYTs are now, I think front panel programmable, where you can get a version of it that is. But that used not to be the case at all. They didn't want somebody using the radio to be able to make changes to the radio. And DMR, like I said, it's commercial. It's very popular in trunk radio systems. Like your local emergency group probably uses it, or something similar to DMR, or a version of it. Their thing is DMR does not understand call signs. It uses a DMR ID for each radio in place of a call sign. So if you have a Yaesu or an ICOM, you can program in your call sign, and when you key down, everybody on the other side knows who you are, where you are. In addition to that, your ID technically is sent in data, so you wouldn't have to ID every 10 minutes by voice, although it's still great practice to do so. I still recommend you do that. But from the FCC, the data is considered ID'd. So you can transfer pictures and other kinds of data without having to jump in and ID. Where in DMR, it just sends in your digital ID. It doesn't send your call sign at all. So you have to ID in DMR just like you do on analog FM, because your ID is not tied to a call sign. There are databases that tie ID to the call sign, but from the FCC's perspective, you are not IDing when you're keying down that. And because of that, I make a note here that in amateur radio, digital transmissions like automated GPS and text messages are technically illegal because they do not include your call sign. There's a lot of debate around this. People still do it. I see it happen all the time. And if you would voice ID and then send a text message, you technically are IDing yourself for the FCC rules. But if you're just driving around and GPS is sending out your information every so often, you're not IDing, and that technically doesn't meet the FCC requirements. Again, lots of debate around it. I see it happening all the time. I just wanted to throw it out there so that you're aware of that. All right, before we jump into the programming interface, I do want to walk through where you can get information about the talk groups on your local repeaters. So I'm looking at one here that's in my local area. Now, this particular talk group list is actually more updated on the website, but this is one I can give you an example. So if you have a local DMR repeater group, I would look at their website. They may have more updated information. But I just want to show you, depending on where you are, you may be able to get it out of here. So this particular site is on Repeater Book, and as I said, this repeater has more information at this website right here than it does on here. They ask you go there to get for updates, but in your area, this may be all you have. So if you look at the talk group, there'll be a button that says Open Talk Group View, and if you look down here, you see the time slot in the talk group. So as I said, DMR has 2 time slots. So time slot 1's right here, and then time slot 2 is down here. And then here's the talk group ID, and here's the name of the talk group, what the talk group name is. So there's a couple of things in here I also want to point out. You see there over here, the access says PTT and then full time. So let's talk a little bit about what that means. So when it says full time, it exactly is exactly that. So in this particular repeater, on time slot 1 and talk group 9 is always available. So if you would turn your radio to the channel that has configured for talk group 9, you could just listen and you would hear any conversations that are on there. That also goes for 91, and then these other ones. Here's Maryland, Pennsylvania, Northeast. These are all full time. So you don't have to do anything to hear it. You just turn the channel to it. But let's say you want to listen to worldwide talk group 1 on time slot 1. If you would turn to that, unless somebody else has already done it, you would not hear anything. To activate that time slot, you have to kerchunk. So you have to key down and it would activate that time slot. So what happens at that point is it links talk group 1 to this repeater on time slot 1. And it stays active for, depending on the timeout, I think it's typically 15 minutes, 10-15 minutes. So if you don't transmit on that talk group in that amount of time, it'll time out and go back to the PTT mode. However, if you're talking on it, it'll keep, and you're active on it, it will keep it connected until it eventually times out. So that I want to make sure you understand when you look at this and it says PTT, even though you turn to this talk group, you're not going to hear anything until you key down on it. But the ones that are full-time, you don't have to key down because they're always connected to it. So these PTTs are temporary connections, and while you're in use. So you come on down here and you see here's time slot 2. So you see in this particular one, talk group 2, 8, and 9, which are local. Penmar is here in the Maryland, Pennsylvania area, are full-time. Everything else that's down here is PTT. Well, there's some more. There's Delmarva, which is, and then Maryland local, Western PA, and North Central PA. So these are full-time, but the rest of these are all PTT. So these are all available to you. Now, this particular repeater is a DMR Mark repeater. So if you don't see it on this list and it's DMR Mark, you cannot activate it. That is different with Brandmeister. With Brandmeister, you can activate any talk group on any time slot just by doing a PTT on it. And we can go back and look at one that's like that. And let me see if we can go back up here and look at this one. This is a Brandmeister repeater. And if you open the talk group view, you see there's the only thing listed really is full time. Because all of the other part-time, the PTTs, you can bring on either time slot and just key down on that talk group and then it'll connect it right up to the Brandmeister. It's just how they work in the background's a little bit different. The DMR Mark uses a C bridge and it's set for certain things, where the Brandmeister just works differently. It's more peer-to-peer, and you can key down on anything to activate any talk group on either time slot. Typically, you'll see that they want certain things on talk group 2, certain things on talk group 1. Most commonly, the full-time stuff's on time slot 1, and they like you to use the time slot 2 for PTT, but you got to look at your local repeater operator. Everybody does it a little bit differently. But I just wanted to show you how on Repeater Book you can come and find what's configured. So when we get into programming the radio here, that's where you would get some of your information. So I just wanted to do that before we started programming the radio. So let's jump over to now and start programming the radio. Okay, so here we are in the programming software, and I'm actually doing this kind of remote. It's a little easier to record this way. When you first load the software up, you're going to probably end up in this channel setting over here, and you can see the channels that I have listed here. And this is my what I'm going to call my large code plug. So there's lots of channels in here. I can go down and look, but see what I got here. I have a couple of thousand. I may have closer to 4,000. I don't know. This is not typical, just so you know. I drive lots of places from around, so I have lots of channels set up, and I also have things from when traveling and hotspots and all that. So anyways, lots of channels can be programmed in here. I think this particular programming software or in radio holds like 4,096 or something like that. But one of the first things we need to do before we start setting up a channel is we need to add in talk groups. So when we talked about talk groups a little bit earlier, I have here the talk groups that in mine. I think I got like 140 or so, 155. There are many more than 155, but these are the ones that I most commonly use, and I have set up for programming other people's code plugs for them. I will put a link to this list in the comments below, and you can go download this. It gets you started. These are the most common ones that you'll find people using, but there's many more out there, and you can add to this list real easy. This will get you started at least. The other thing that we need to do is we need to put in your DMR ID. So we're going to go over here to the radio ID list, and this is one of my radio IDs, and you need to at least put one in here. You can put in more than one, and we can show you how you select what radio ID a channel is set up for. One of the things about this particular radio that I do not like is that if I change my radio ID, let's say I put my wife's ID in here, and she takes my radio, I have to program the channels for her and myself separately. So I can't just say I want to change the radio ID and then she gets all the ones I already have configured. It doesn't work that way in this radio, and you'll see that when we get into the channel configuration. So that's one of my gripes about this particular radio. And the other thing, since DMR does not send across your call sign and name and all that kind of information in the data packet, we have to have a way, if you want the name to show up on the screen, we have to have a way to take that ID and translate it over to something that's meaningful. So in this particular radio, and this is something that's not all radios do, so it's something to consider. It's one of the reasons I like these Anytones, is they have this built in, is you can import the list of contacts. You see it's going on, I click on this. This is the first 20,000. This particular radio can hold 500,000 names. So here's the radio ID, and then here is the name of the person, where they're from, and the type of call, the call sign, the state or province, and the country, and any additional remarks. This is a downloadable database. You can go out to DMR ID and download this database and import it. You can do it every day if you want. The new ones are being added every day. This, like I said, this radio, the newest radio, can hold 500,000 of these. So when you see somebody's talking, in addition to the Talkgroup ID or the DMR ID, this can be both actually. In addition to that, you will see the name and where they're from and stuff like that as well on the screen, rather than just the DMR ID. Some radios don't support that. They only show you the DMR ID. Particularly the ones that are older, and so this is a new feature, a relatively new feature. Now other radios can do this too. Some of them do that with custom firmware and stuff like that, but this is something that if you want that, look for a radio that supports that option. The Anytones definitely do. So that's something else we can import as well. But what I want to do in this particular video is walk through programming channels. So let's go to the channel list here. And we're going to go look. So here you see these are analog. Let's look at an analog. Here's a local repeater. You double click on it and it comes up. You put the channel name in here. You see that I actually name my channels a little differently. This is so they sort properly on my screen. I have other radios that have these programmed in as well. I use the same channel numbers for every radio. So 1 is always W3FTK, for example. 2 is always another local repeater. So I can go down through the list, and this will sort in my zone easy enough, so I can just scroll down. I can know if I want to go to like the Northern Virginia repeater, I go to 5 and I just scroll down to 5. So that's why I have these numbers in here, so it sorts in the right order. This is a totally freeform field. You can put anything you want in this field. Here you see that we set the receive frequency 14673, the transmit frequency of 14613, and we have changed its type to analog. So we have these different modes here. We're going to be focusing on analog and digital, but you can see that you can also do mixed modes as well. The transmit power for this particular one is turbo, which is higher than high. So you have low, medium, high, and turbo. On this radio, turbo is supposedly 8 watts. And this is a wide bandwidth. This is a ham radio, so it's 25K. We don't want to turn on busy lockout, well, you definitely can. And then here's the scan list I mentioned before. This channel can be a member of all of these different scan lists. I have it set up for this particular scan list. And APRS is turned off, and we're going to exclude it from monitoring and roaming. And then down here we set the analog information. And this particular repeater has a PL tone of 141.3, and we want it to both encode and decode, so that if we hear this frequency and something else is on it, we won't decode it. Squelch mode is carrier, and optional signal, which I'm not quite sure what that one does, is off, and so is the PTT ID. And we don't have any of these other custom things over here as well. So, and the options for the squelch mode are digital and CTCSS. So even though I set this for decode, it's not even going to do it with this one. So it's in carrier mode only. So that's what a analog one is. It's pretty common, pretty standard stuff. No big deal as far as configuring the analog channels. Let's come down here and look at a digital channel. So we're going to come down here and let's see. let's just look at this particular channel here. This is Talkgroup, as you can see on the right hand side, Talkgroup North America. So we're going to double click on that one. And here we see again the name. So when you have multiple zones, it's nice to know what zone you're talking about. So in the case of me, I have probably 20 different DMR repeaters. So I give them a 2-digit code, and when we create a zone, I can go down and find the ones that I'm looking for, all right next to each other. See the top, things are very similar. You have the receive and transmit frequency, and then we change the channel type to digital. Now what you'll notice when you do this is this side over here now is available, and this down here in the analog section is no longer available. So it does not allow you to make changes to the opposite of what it is. So, and then we still have the same thing. We still have turbo. Transmit permit is always on, and there is no scan list on this particular channel, so it's off. And we're not reporting APRS. And this particular one has the DMR mode set to simplex. Maybe this is not a great example, because we have simplex, repeater, and double slot. So typically if you want a repeater, you would make this repeater. And then on the right hand side over here, you have to pick your contact. So this list is the list of your talk groups that you've programmed in there, that list I showed you earlier. So I come in here and I can pick any talk group that I want. So in this particular case, I'm on North America. You can see it's highlighted, a group call. I would just pick North America, double click on it, and then stick it in here. Now here's where the radio ID comes in. So I only have one radio ID programmed in here right now, and that's for K3DO. If I had another one programmed in here, like say for my wife, KC3IYN, she would be listed here as well. Which is why I said one of my complaints about how this radio is programmed is this channel can only be for one radio ID. You cannot share them. Here you see color code of 1. There we are, color code of 1. And we're on slot 2. And you can pick slot 1 or slot 2. You just got to know which one the repeater uses. And we talked about received group list. And again, I don't recommend that you actually use this because it's confusing. Say you created a received group that had 5 different talk groups in it. When you pick that received group, you're going to hear all those talk groups. But when you key down to talk back, you're only going to talk back on North America. So I always leave this as none. Digital encryption needs to be off. In the United States, encrypting audio is illegal, so you cannot digital encrypt your audio. And then all the AES encryption is off because the digital encryption is off. So that's how you configure a DMR channel. So let's walk down the bottom, and we are going to just create a new one. And I'll pick a repeater here, and let's see. Well, it's far enough down. I'll just click one here. I'm going to double click. Here we are on our blank channel, and we're just going to call this, we're going to call it Maryland, since we're here in Maryland. And I'm going to just pick a repeater that I know. 925 and 446. 925. And we're going to make this digital. So there's digital. Transmit power. We're going to go back to turbo. Always do TX permit. Scan list. I'm going to put on a scan list. I'll put in one of these. This is this repeater right here anyways. And then we're not going to report APRS. The DMR mode is going to be repeater. And on this side, we picked Maryland. So we're going to click on this list and we're going to look for Maryland. Right here it is. Radio ID obviously is K3DO. And this one I'm going to put on slot 2. And no received group list, no digital encryption. So there we are. We are done. So there we did. We created a entry right there for Maryland on this repeater here in Frederick, and in high power mode. So it would work the exact same way if we were to put in an analog. We're just going to put in the another repeater, which I know off the top of my head, so that's why I'm going to use it. And the input frequency, receive frequency for the radio is 14673, and the transmit frequency to the repeater is 14613. Just like that. Going to change it to analog. Again, I'm going to put this back to turbo. This is a wide band, so it's going to be 25. No busy lockout, and let's see. I'll put my scan list in here. just like that. No APRS, and down at the bottom we do want to do the decode, which is 141.3, and the encode. We want to be able to talk to the repeater. 141.3. The squelch mode, no optional signal. Everything else is good. So there is our analog channel. So here we've created these 2 channels. All right, now that we've created 2 channels, we need to put them into a zone. On a DMR radio, you do not see the channels unless you are active in a zone. You're always active in a zone. So we're going to go up here to the zone on the left-hand side up here, now that we have some channels. And you can see this is my large list of stuff zones where I travel around to different places and stuff. So I can use these for roaming. But we're going to look at the first couple here. So we're going to look at analog first. So in my case, I have an analog zone. We're going to bring it up. And on the right-hand side, you can see all the different repeaters that I have in this zone. And these are all analog. So these numbers, and you see the numbers beforehand, that helps me to sort them, because on all my radios, channel 1 is always W3FTK, channel 7 is always K3MAD, so all the things are the same. 27, for example, is always my crossband, my repeater. It says my repeater right there. So that's why I have all these things numbered. I keep them the same across all my radios. So no what radio I have, I know where to find it. But you can do this in any order you want. You don't got to put all analog in one. You can put a mixture of analog and digital all in the same zone. These particular radios, I think it's 120 channels you can put into a zone. Some radios, though, are limited to 16 per zone, so you have to take that into consideration when you're programming your DMR radio. So let's go ahead and look at another zone here. We'll look at a digital zone. Let's find, here is the Frederick repeater. Well, let's do this. Here's the Frederick repeater. So you see over here, and you see I have this letter K in front. And the reason for that is if I'm trying to add more channels to this particular zone, I can scroll down here and you can see what channels need to be in that zone. That's why I have these 2-letter codes in the front, is based on the zone. I can just go and make sure I find them all. Let's see. Let's make sure I don't miss any down here. Actually, I'm going to be missing some because in this particular zone I've broken it out. So there's K's. So I can come down through here and say, there's all the K's that I want to put into the zone. This particular repeater, because I use it so much, I have multiple zones for one repeater based on what it is. So if we go and we look at the next zone we have down here, here's like the states. So I have all the states in this zone for the local repeater. So I can really quickly jump from one thing to the other instead of scrolling through 120 channels, because that's a lot of channels to be scrolling through trying to find something. So I've broken it out for that particular repeater. But some of these repeaters that I use are not very, don't have many channels in them. So here's one. This one has 34, but you can see the list is much shorter, just because they don't have the channels available. The one here in Frederick is a Brandmeister, so everything is available anytime you want it, where these are DMR marks, so they're restricted to whatever the repeater owner has running there. So that's what a zone does. So you can, like I said, you can mix things in and out with analog or digital. If you want like one zone to scan through, you can bring everything you want into that one zone. It's totally up to you. Most code plugs I see only have a couple of zones. They're not like me. So this is a very unusual code plug. And you see also I have these hotspots. So hotspot 1, and then here's hotspot 1 with different areas. And what I mean by areas is in DMR, you have all these different areas of the country that are listed here as well. So most people will have like maybe 3 for a hotspot and 1 or 2 for a local repeater. If you're just using, if you're not moving around, then you may only have just a hotspot, depending on where you live. It may be your only thing that's available. Okay, so let's talk about the scan list. So I only have 6 scan lists, and I recently took a vacation down into Florida to the villages. So here's one that I set up, and if you double click on it, it comes up, and you can, just like zones, you can add to your scan list of what repeaters you want to be in the scan list. So again, these are the repeaters in the villages area that I stuck in here. I would change it a little bit now, because now that I've been there, I didn't realize which ones are probably within range and are not. But you can see that you put this in your scan list, and then when you go to edit a channel, let's jump back over to a channel. I'll bring up this digital, I'll bring up the analog one, doesn't matter really. You see right here where it lists a scan list. So I'm going to say I want the villages. So if I'm on this channel and I click the scan button, it's going to scan all the repeaters that I had in this villages scan list. So that's how that works. And the thing is, every channel can have a different scan list. So you could go nuts if you wanted to as far as scan list goes. The way I typically do it is if I'm on a particular zone, I will put the same scan list on the zone. So I'm typically on one repeater in a zone, and I'll hit the scan list. I'll set the scan list to that repeater, and that way I'm scanning that repeater. I don't use multiple repeaters at one time, and most of them is just one. But I do use the roaming when I drive down or I'm driving around sometimes to use that. That's why you see all these different zones. These are all the repeaters that I generally am around from time to time. So that's why I have it so complicated. I am going to put a link in the bottom to a very simple code plug that will get you started, that basically has a repeater and a hotspot configuration. So it's only a couple of zones, and that'll get you started and maybe help you figure out the programming of it. I would say the most complicated part that people have a problem with, and if we go and look at the digital mode here, is understanding the color code and the slots, and then the contact, or it says contact, but really it's a talk group. So, like I mentioned, most of the repeaters in the United States are color code 1 for DMR, and then we got to know what slot 1 or 2 you want to be on. And if it's Brandmeister, it doesn't really matter. Unless a repeater operator asks you to do certain things on certain ones, which some do. But it does matter with DMR Mark. It's not quite as flexible as far as calling up a channel really quick. So just remember that you have 2 slots you can put things on, and to look at the repeater operators list so that you match up with them, and just make sure your talk group is in here. So there is I will do another video on quickly making changes. So let's say, in my case, a lot of these repeaters that are in this zone are all managed by a same group. So I can roam from one to the other, and I understand basically what most of the channels are. There are a few exceptions to that, but there is a way you can export a channel really quickly and make a quick change outside this program and then re-import it again. So I'm going to do a video on that, and this is kind of specific to this programming software. They all can do something like it, but I'm going to give you an example for this particular one, where you can export your list of channels and you can copy and paste them and move them around very quickly without having to go in. Because I can tell you that if you're in here and you're going through each one of these individual ones and you're adding them individually, it is a real pain to do. There is a copy and paste function, but it still requires you to go into every line. Where if you have a repeater configuration that's similar across the board, you can pretty much go out and copy it. So there's a function up here, and I'll just give you, I won't walk through it, but the export function, and you can export the channel list and then bring it up in like Excel or something that does CSV files, and copy and paste everything in there, and then re-import it back in, and make it much quicker than going through each individual channel and changing it. It really takes a long time to configure your radio if you're going to configure every single talk group on every repeater, particularly if they are the same. The other thing I'm going to walk through is if you have multiple of the same types of radios. So let me just explain this way. So I have 878s, I have an 868, which I think I gave away now, and then I have the 578, and different versions of the 878 use different programming software. But the easy way to convert from one to the other, like say when I got my 578, I came into my 878 right here, and I did the export, but I use this export all right here, and it'll ask you where you want to put it, and it'll output all of your files. Well, in the 578, they have the exact same thing. So you go into your tool like this, and you do import. And you say import file list, and it'll find the file that you created when you export it, and it'll bring everything over. Because they're the same software, basically, they can import and export from each other. So it makes it really quick to copy over a code plug from one radio to another. Oh, and it's actually the better way, if you're going to give somebody a code plug, is to export like that and compress it into a single file and send it. Because depending on the version of software, the backend database does change, and you might not be able to open it. It'll come up and tell you that it's a different version of CPS, and you can't open it. But if you send it to them in text files, they have no problem opening it. So that's why when you download the stuff in the comments below with these different code plugs, you'll be able to import them because they come down as text files. I'm not going to give you the actual files themselves. I'm going to give you the text files. And let me give you one other tidbit here, and this particularly on the Brandmeiser network. I don't know how the other networks work or don't work, but if you have a friend or anybody you know that has a DMR ID, so I'm going to come down here to the bottom and give you an example. Way too far. I've got nowhere near that many. So if you come down here, like I have one of my friends, KC3QPJ, does a net on his personal talk group his DMR ID. So if you put this in here as a talk group in Brandmeister, it becomes a live talk group. So 3174087 is his DMR ID. Everybody gets together at a particular time to join his net, and it puts this in as a talk group, not as a personal ID, and it functions like a talk group. Not all, I don't know, I mean, Brandmeister may be the only one that even does that. I don't know about the other networks, but that's really nice to be able to create your own talk group on the fly. You see in there, I got mine in there as well as my wife's, and so it just allows you to do some quick connecting to people without having to do a private connection. All right, so before we go here, I'm going to show you a copy of what I'm putting out there for download. It's a generic. You can see there's only 10 zones in all this. And you see these top two, they're basically designed for you to replace with your local repeater. This is one I did for the village as well. I was going down there. But I just changed these top two based on what I'm trying to do with it. But you can easily adjust for your local repeater, or you can delete completely if you don't have a local repeater. And there's two hotspots. In the area I live in, Maryland, our repeaters are coordinated by a group called TMark. And what they have done is they've set aside some frequencies designed for hotspots so that the hotspots don't interfere with repeaters and vice versa. So there's there's a small frequency range. I have set up 2 different hotspot frequencies. So if we come in and we look at the hotspot frequencies, we can tell what those are, but they can be easily adjusted to be whatever is approved in your area to use for hotspots if there is something. So I set up 2 different ones. They have the same channels in both. In my case here, I actually have 2 different hotspots. I have one in my truck and one in the house. So I switch back and forth, but I don't want them to interfere if they're both in range of each other. So that's why I use two different frequencies. And maybe something similar can happen with you too. So I left them both in here. So 3 of these are for each of the hotspots. I've also included simplex, and I don't know if you're aware, but DMR also has simplex frequencies. And these are all in here, and the frequencies are listed, and the channels are all defined as well. So this is configured. You can just turn the knob on, I don't know what this is here, what is about 15 or so simplex frequencies from from all 3 bands, actually. Depending on what radio you have, you may be able to do the 144, the 220, and the 440 range. So this has all of them in there. And then in addition to that, the other thing that I've added, and this is because I know a lot of people that are listening to the railroad, is I have put in all 97 frequencies for the railroads. If you like listening to the trains and everything, that's in here as well. Easily deleted if you don't want it in there. It's as simple really as right-clicking on this and saying delete, and that zone will go away. So you can adjust it as much as you want, but this would get you close, and that's what the whole idea of this code plug is to get you close. So you could download it and adjust it as necessary to fit your needs and get a quick jump on it from that point of view. Okay, so there's one more thing I want to talk about, and this is kind of radio specific. All these radios have some of these functions, but I want to go in and look at some additional settings you can do for the 878, and this also applies to the 578 as well. So on the left-hand side, the other right, over here, the optional setting. If you click on optional setting, it's going to open up a window, and I want to look at a couple of things that are in here. First of all, one of the things you can do is you can change the power on screen. So this is a radio that I had set up for a friend of mine, and you can see that I had put in his name and his call sign. I actually use a picture on mine, so that's one of the things. The other thing is I don't like the default sound So I come in here and I change it, the call tone, and you can write down what I have, but basically what this is the Motorola sound. I like that much better than the one that comes with it. So you can come in here and set your options in here for different tones and stuff like that as well. And then one of the things that I want to talk about is these key functions that are right here. So we're going to bring up the key functions. So I have gone through and set them to be different things. You can put them where you want as well. But there's a couple of things that I want to talk about. I mentioned before about this promiscuous mode, and that is what they call digital monitor on this radio. So I have the PF1 key set up for promiscuous mode or digital monitor, so that anytime I can click that button and listen to what's on the channel that I'm not hearing because I'm not on the right talk group. So that's what that is. I have set up the other PF buttons to be scan and power settings, and then the P1s I've set up to be main channel switch. These two are the two on the front. So the very front left one allows me to change between the A and B side, and if you hold it down right here, the P1 long, it switches to single channel mode versus A and B, and if you press it again in that mode, it switches between A and B. And then I have reverse. I use reverse quite a bit, particularly if I'm trying to hear what the repeater's hearing. So I put that down as the short one, and the long one it's how I switch between VFO mode and memory mode. And then I have a couple other ones set up here, call, Vox. I don't use these three very often, so that's why they're kind of at the bottom there. But I wanted to bring up the digital monitor because that is such a handy feature that's on this radio to jump into promiscuous mode, really quickly to hear what's going on. There's all kinds of other things in here you can set up as well. Like you can come in and set up your display, its backlight, and all that kind of information. You should probably just look through here and see what features you'd like to turn on, the recordings in here, Vox, and things like that. Work mode is probably something you probably would never use when you come to amateur radio. That's more of the commercial side there too. But you can do all kinds of nice little adjustments in here. Like, do you want to show the last caller, and do you want to show their ID, their call sign, or both? So you can come in and make all these adjustments in here as well. So very nice things to set up in the optional settings. Every radio has some kind of optional setting and different things, but these radios are pretty nicely built out as far as functions go. And that goes for both the 578 and 878, most of the Anytone digital radios. All right, now that we've walked through programming the radio and some of the features in this radio that we have right here, hopefully you get a little bit of understanding of the terminology and what it really means to amateur radio versus the DMR side. Get a little bit of understanding of how DMR works and not be quite as afraid of programming your radio. If you like this video, please give it a thumbs up down below. Definitely appreciate that. Click the subscribe button and be sure to share it with your friends. And any additional comments, please put them below. We love the feedback, good or bad. We take all feedback and take it very seriously and read every comment. If you're not a member of your local radio club, be sure to find it, because that's how you make radio better, is by joining a local club. Local clubs are spreading the word and getting people more involved in radio, and also local clubs are involved in events and any kind of safety things that are fun to do as well. So make sure you find your local club and you join a local club and help support that and expand amateur radio. 73s, talk to you all later.